Christmas Eve, snow fell thick and heavy on a small street in Boston. Yellow light from the bakery spilled onto the sidewalk, where a woman clutched two shivering twin children, begging for leftover bread. Passers-by looked away and hurried past. One man stopped. Imagine this: a single dad, rushing home with a gift for his daughter, spots a desperate mom and her kids in the freezing cold. What he does next will shock you. He asked gently, "Have the children eaten yet?" She looked up, eyes tired, tears streaming down her cheeks. He froze in recognition. She was the woman who'd saved his daughter's life last year. And now, she had nothing left but her bare, trembling hands, and two hungry children depending on her. Daniel Ward, 38 years old, worked as a plumber, fixing broken pipes and water heaters in Boston's older neighborhoods. He'd lost his wife 4 years ago to cancer, leaving him to raise their daughter Ella, now 8 years old, all alone. Life was hard, money always tight. But Daniel focused on teaching Ella what mattered most. Nobody is truly poor, he'd tell her, as long as they still have something to share with others. On Christmas Eve, Daniel took one final emergency call downtown. A burst pipe in an office building needed immediate repair before the holiday weekend. The extra money would buy Ella the art supplies she wanted. Daniel never turned down work that could make his daughter's Christmas better. He finished the job late, well after dark, and was walking back to his truck when he noticed 3 figures huddled outside a bakery closing for the night. A woman held 2 small children close, trying to shield them from the snow with her thin jacket. She spoke quietly to the bakery owner through the glass door. "Please, just some old bread for the children. Anything you were gonna throw away." The owner shook his head and pulled down the security gate. "We don't do charity tonight. Come back after the holidays." The woman's shoulders slumped in defeat as she turned away, the children clinging to her legs. But what happens when a stranger steps in with a simple act of kindness? You won't believe how this moment changes everything. Daniel approached slowly, not wanting to startle them. "Excuse me, sir," he called to the bakery owner, locking up. "How much for whatever bread you have left?" The owner paused. "It's all going to waste anyway. $40 and you can have the lot." Daniel pulled out his wallet, the money he'd just earned from the emergency call, and handed it over. "Then I'll take it all." He turned to the woman and children with a gentle smile. "Can you help me carry this? There's too much for one person." The woman looked up at him with confusion and weariness. And in that moment, Daniel's breath caught. He recognized her face, despite the exhaustion and desperation. Claire Morris, the emergency room nurse who'd saved Ella's life a year ago when she'd fallen from playground equipment and suffered a serious head injury. Claire had stayed with Ella for 8 hours straight, monitoring her condition, refusing to leave even after her shift ended, ensuring the little girl would be okay. "Claire, is that you?" Daniel asked quietly. She stared at him, recognition slowly dawning, followed by shame. "Daniel, oh God, I'm sorry, you shouldn't see me like this." She tried to turn away, but one of the children, a little boy, tugged at her sleeve. "Mommy, is he the nice man?" Claire's composure cracked, tears spilled down her cheeks. "Yes, baby, he is." Daniel looked at the scene properly now. Claire's jacket was torn at the shoulder, her hands purple from cold. Both children, twins about 5 years old, were shivering despite being pressed against their mother for warmth. They wore summer clothes, completely inadequate for winter, and their shoes had holes. "How long have you been out here?" Daniel asked, keeping his voice gentle. Claire wouldn't meet his eyes. "Just tonight. We're fine, really, just a temporary situation." Daniel could see that was a lie, in the way the children's eyes were sunken with hunger, and how Claire swayed slightly with exhaustion, and the hopelessness that radiated from all 3 of them. "Tonight is Christmas Eve," he said firmly. "Nobody should be outside in this weather, especially not children. Please let me help. My truck is right here." Claire shook her head. "I can't ask you to do that. You've already done enough." "You're not asking," Daniel replied. "I'm offering. And after what you did for Ella last year, after you saved my daughter's life and refused to leave her side, this isn't even close to repaying that debt. He walked to his truck and opened the passenger door, then looked back at Claire, who stood frozen in indecision. Please, it's Christmas Eve. Let someone help you the way you've helped others. The little girl twin started crying quietly, and that seemed to break Claire's resistance. She nodded once, barely perceptible. Daniel gently picked up both children, one in each arm, and carried them to his truck. Claire followed behind, clutching the bag of bread, tears freezing on her cheeks. As Daniel started the engine and turned on the heat, he glanced at the faded lettering on his truck's door that read, Ward Plumbing, fix what's broken. He had a feeling he was about to fix something much more important than pipes. But this is just the beginning. Wait until you hear the secret that ties their past together in a way no one saw coming. As they drove through the snowy streets, one of the twins whispered, Are you an angel? Daniel smiled. No, sweetheart, just someone who remembers what it's like to need help. They arrived at Daniel's modest apartment, a small 2-bedroom place that was clean but showed signs of tight finances and a single parent doing his best. Ella came running out of her room when she heard the door open, her face lighting up with excitement. Daddy, you're home. Who are these people? Daniel set the twins down gently. Santa sent them to visit us tonight. This is Miss Claire and her children. They're going to stay with us for a little while. Ella, wise beyond her 8 years from growing up without a mother, immediately understood on some level that these people needed help. She ran to her room and came back with blankets and her favorite stuffed animals. Here, you can share these. They help when you're sad. The little girl twin accepted the stuffed rabbit with wide eyes, and Claire had to turn away to hide fresh tears. Daniel heated up the soup he'd made earlier, sliced the bread from the bakery, and watched as Claire and her children ate like they hadn't seen food in days, which he suspected might be true. When they finished, he made hot chocolate for the kids while Claire explained what had happened, her voice barely above a whisper so the children wouldn't hear all the details. The hospital I worked at closed down 6 months ago. They declared bankruptcy and left all of us without final paychecks. I had some savings, but it went fast with rent and food for the twins. I tried to find another nursing job, but the market is full, and without a reference from my last employer, because they don't exist anymore, nobody would hire me. Her hands shook around the mug of tea Daniel had made her. We lost our apartment 3 weeks ago. We've been staying at a shelter, but they're full for the holidays, so tonight we were on the street. Daniel felt anger rising in his chest, not at Claire, but at a system that could let someone like her, someone who dedicated her life to helping others, fall through the cracks so completely. What about family, friends? Claire shook her head. My parents died when I was young. I have no siblings, and most of my friends couldn't help, even if they wanted to. Medical professionals don't make as much as people think, and everyone I know is barely getting by themselves. The twins, warm and fed for the first time in who knows how long, had fallen asleep on Daniel's couch, curled up together under Ella's blankets. Ella sat beside them, gently patting their heads like she was watching over them. Daniel saw Claire watching her daughter watch the children, and something passed between them, an unspoken understanding of what it meant to be a parent trying to protect your child from a world that could be cruel and cold. Around midnight, the apartment's electricity suddenly cut out, plunging them into darkness. Daniel cursed under his breath. He'd been meaning to pay the electric bill but had prioritized buying Ella's Christmas present instead. He found a small candle in the kitchen drawer, lit it, and placed it on the table. The tiny flame cast dancing shadows on the walls. I'm sorry, he said. The electricity will be back on after the holiday when I can pay the bill. Claire looked at the small candle and then at Daniel, really looked at him. This man who had almost nothing himself but was sharing what little he had without hesitation. You're behind on your bills, and you still helped us, she said quietly. Daniel shrugged. A small light is still enough to share. That's what matters. Ella brought out her night light that ran on batteries. See, we have lots of light. In the morning, Daniel left early before anyone woke up. He put most of the money he had left on the kitchen table with a note that read, Not a gift, just an advance on faith that better days are coming. He went to work, took 3 emergency calls on Christmas Day because nobody else would, and came home late that night with enough money to pay his electric bill and buy groceries. But when he opened his apartment door, the place was empty. Claire and the twins were gone. On the table where he'd left the money was a note in Claire's handwriting. "Daniel, you taught me that Christmas isn't about what you have, it's about what you share. You've given us more than shelter, you've given us hope. But I can't keep taking from you when you have so little yourself. We'll find our way. Thank you for reminding me that good people still exist. Please use this money for Ella. Merry Christmas." Daniel's hand shook as he held the note. Ella came out of her room, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, where did Claire and the babies go?" Daniel couldn't answer, could only pull his daughter close and stare at the extinguished candle still sitting on the table, the one that had provided light in the darkness just the night before. On the table next to the note was the money he'd left, untouched, and next to that was something else, a small silver pin shaped like a medical cross that he recognized as the nursing badge Claire had been wearing. Under the badge was written in small letters, "For the man who proved that the best medicine is kindness." Hold on, because 3 days later, a chilling news report changes everything again. 3 days after Christmas, Daniel heard news that made his blood run cold. A local news station reported that a woman and 2 children had gone missing during the post-Christmas snowstorm that had blanketed Boston. They showed a grainy photo provided by a shelter, and Daniel immediately recognized Claire and the twins. The report said they'd last been seen near downtown, and the temperatures had dropped to dangerous levels. Daniel didn't hesitate. He called his boss and said he needed emergency time off, then spent the next 12 hours driving through every neighborhood, checking shelters, soup kitchens, and any place he thought Claire might have gone. He showed her photo to dozens of people, and finally, just as darkness was falling again, someone at a homeless outreach center said they'd seen a woman matching that description at a makeshift medical station set up in an old warehouse near the port. Daniel drove there immediately and found a converted warehouse space where volunteers had set up cots, heaters, and a basic medical station. And there in a corner, surrounded by people who were sick and cold and desperate, was Claire. She was wearing her old nursing scrubs under a donated coat, and she was treating patients, checking temperatures, distributing medicine, doing what she did best, even though she had nothing herself. When she saw Daniel, her face went pale. "You shouldn't be here. You should be home with Ella." Daniel walked up to her, his emotions barely controlled. "You were treating patients. You're homeless and starving, and you're out here treating other people." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "I couldn't just take from you and do nothing. These people needed help, and I'm a nurse. It's what I do." Daniel pulled her into a tight embrace, not caring about the dozen volunteers watching them. "You incredible, stubborn, amazing woman. You save everyone except yourself." He pulled back and looked at her seriously. "No more. You're coming home with me, and this time you're staying until we figure this out properly. Those twins need their mother healthy, and you can't help anyone if you collapse from exhaustion and cold." This time, Claire didn't argue, perhaps because she'd reached the end of her strength, or perhaps because she finally understood that accepting help didn't make her weak, it made her human. They collected the twins, who'd been coloring with donated crayons in a corner, and Daniel drove them all back to his apartment, which now had electricity again, thanks to the money from his Christmas Day work. But the real twist? It's about to get even more unbelievable. Over the next week, as the city slowly returned to normal after the holidays, Daniel made calls and did research while Claire recovered her strength. And in doing so, he discovered something that left him stunned. A year ago, when Ella had been injured and brought to the emergency room, the hospital's insurance company had wanted to classify her injury as resulting from parental negligence to avoid paying the full claim. It was Claire who had fought them. Claire who had documented everything, proving it was a simple accident. Claire who had gone to bat for Daniel, even though she didn't know him and it wasn't her job. That fight with the insurance company had put her at odds with hospital administration. When the hospital started facing financial troubles months later, Claire had been one of the first let go, officially for budget reasons, but really because she'd made powerful people angry by choosing to protect a patient's family over corporate interests. She'd lost her job because she'd saved Daniel's daughter and protected Daniel's reputation. "You lost everything because of me," Daniel said quietly when he confronted her with what he'd learned. Claire shook her head firmly. "I lost a job because I chose to do the right thing. That's not the same as losing everything. I kept my integrity. I kept my ability to sleep at night, knowing I'd helped a child and her father. That's worth more than any job." But Daniel wasn't satisfied with that answer. He spent another week making calls and finally got through to someone who could help. His boss's brother-in-law ran a community health center that was expanding and looking for experienced nurses who understood how to work with underserved populations. Daniel practically begged for an interview for Claire. And when the director heard her story, heard how she'd been treating homeless patients in a warehouse with no resources, he hired her on the spot, not just as a nurse, but as the coordinator for their new mobile medical unit. The job came with a decent salary, health insurance, and help finding affordable housing. When Daniel told Claire, she broke down completely, sobbing so hard she couldn't speak. She, the twins, not understanding everything but understanding their mother was crying, hugged her legs. Ella joined the group hug, and Daniel stood there watching these four people, this makeshift family that had formed out of desperation and kindness, and felt something shift in his chest. But there was one more twist coming. At Claire's first day at the community health center, she met the major donor who'd made the mobile medical unit possible, a wealthy businessman who'd funded the entire project. And that businessman turned out to be the same person whose office building Daniel had fixed the pipe in on Christmas Eve, the emergency call that had given him the money to buy bread for Claire and her children. When the businessman heard the full story, how that emergency call had led to Daniel helping Claire, who was now going to run the program the businessman had funded, he was so moved that he made an additional donation, specifically to help Daniel expand his plumbing business with a focus on doing low-cost repairs for low-income families. "You showed me what Christmas is really about," the businessman said to both of them. "You both gave when you had nothing. Now let me give something back." The local news picked up the story, and suddenly Daniel and Claire became minor celebrities, the single dad plumber and the homeless nurse who'd helped each other and inspired a wealthy donor to do more for the community. But Daniel refused most interview requests, saying simply, "We just did what anyone should do. We helped each other. If you believe real miracles start with small acts of kindness, type "I believe" in the comments." 1 year later, the new light shelter stood where the old warehouse had been, completely renovated and transformed into a state-of-the-art facility providing medical care, temporary housing, and job placement services for homeless families. Claire ran the medical operations, while Daniel handled all the facility maintenance and repairs, donating his time and skills. Neither of them took large salaries, preferring to see the money go toward helping more people. The shelter's success had attracted attention and funding from across the state. What started as one mobile medical unit had grown to 5, covering different neighborhoods and providing health care to thousands of people who had nowhere else to go. Claire had hired a staff of nurses and doctors, many of whom were themselves recovering from homelessness or hard times, people who understood what it meant to need help and were now in a position to provide it. Daniel's plumbing business had grown too, not into something massive and corporate, but into something sustainable and meaningful. He'd hired 2 other single parents who needed flexible work hours, and together they focused on helping low-income families with repairs they couldn't afford. The businessman donor had set up a fund that subsidized their work, allowing them to charge based on what people could pay rather than what the job cost. Media coverage of their story had been overwhelming at first. Reporters wanted to frame it as a heartwarming Christmas miracle, which annoyed both Daniel and Claire because it made their actions seem exceptional when they should be normal. When a major network wanted to do a special about them, Daniel agreed on one condition, that they focus not on him and Claire, but on the dozens of other people doing similar work every day without recognition. The special aired and showed the full ecosystem of people helping people, from volunteers at shelters to teachers who bought supplies for their students to neighbors who shoveled elderly people's sidewalks. Daniel and Claire were just part of a much larger story about community and compassion. The response was overwhelming, with similar initiatives starting in other cities, other people deciding to help in whatever way they could. At the one-year anniversary celebration of New Light Shelter, the businessman donor gave a speech that brought tears to many eyes. A year ago, I made an emergency call for a broken pipe on Christmas Eve. I was angry about working on a holiday, but that call connected me to Daniel, whose kindness toward a stranger changed everything. It taught me that real wealth isn't measured in money, it's measured in what you do for others when nobody's watching and there's no reward. He presented Daniel and Claire each with an award, a simple glass sculpture shaped like a candle flame. This represents what you've both shown us, that one small light shared without hesitation can illuminate an entire community. You've inspired hundreds of people to ask themselves what they can do to help, and that ripple effect will continue long after we're all gone. After the ceremony, Daniel found Claire standing outside the shelter, watching as families came and went, people receiving help and support and dignity. "You know what's strange," she said. "A year ago, I was one of them, desperate and hopeless. Now I'm on the other side, providing the help. But I never forget what it felt like because I was there." Daniel stood beside her. "That's what makes you so good at this. You don't help people from a place of pity, you help them from a place of understanding." They watched as Ella and the twins, who now treated each other like siblings, handed out cookies to children coming into the shelter. The children had decided that every person who came to New Light Shelter should get a cookie and a smile, and they took their self-appointed job very seriously. "They don't see homeless people or poor people," Claire observed. "They just see people who need cookies." Daniel smiled. "Kids understand things adults forget. Everyone deserves basic kindness. If you respect those who help without expecting recognition, comment respect." The following Christmas Eve, exactly 2 years after Daniel had first found Claire and the twins outside the bakery, the 4 children stood in the New Light Shelter kitchen, making cookies together. Ella and the twins had become inseparable, calling each other siblings, even though they didn't share blood. Daniel and Claire supervised from a distance, both reflecting on how much had changed in such a short time. Claire walked over to Daniel with 2 mugs of hot chocolate. "Can I ask you something? What made you stop that night? Dozens of people walked past us, but you stopped. Why?" Daniel thought about it carefully. "I remembered what it was like after my wife died. I remembered standing in the hospital hallway with a newborn baby, no idea how to take care of her, terrified and alone. And I remembered how most people looked away, uncomfortable with my grief. But one nurse took the time to sit with me for an hour, teaching me how to hold Ella properly, how to feed her, telling me I could do this even when I didn't believe it. That nurse saved my life as much as she saved Ella's." He paused and looked at Claire. "When I saw you on Christmas Eve with those twins, I saw myself in that hospital hallway. I saw someone who needed what I needed back then, someone to stop and help without judgment. So I stopped, because I wish someone had stopped for me sooner." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "That nurse who helped you in the hospital, do you remember her name?" Daniel shook his head. "No, I was too overwhelmed to remember." "Why?" Claire pulled out her phone and showed him a photo, her nursing school graduation picture from years ago. "That was me. I was working in maternity that month, covering extra shifts. I remember you, Daniel. I remember thinking you were the most devoted father I'd ever seen, terrified but completely committed to doing right by your daughter." Daniel stared at the photo, then at Claire, understanding dawning. "You've been helping me for years without me even knowing." She smiled through her tears. "Maybe that's how it works. Maybe we're all helping each other in ways we don't realize, creating chains of kindness that connect us across time and circumstances. You helped me because someone helped you, and that someone was me. And I helped you because someone helped me once when I needed it. It's all connected." They walked outside where a light snow was beginning to fall and watched as volunteers arrived to help serve Christmas dinner to over 200 people who would have been alone and cold otherwise. Ella and the twins ran out to greet each person who arrived, offering cookies and hugs without hesitation. Daniel put his arm around Claire's shoulders in a gesture that had become natural over the past year. We're not just teaching them to help people, we're teaching them that helping people is what makes life worth living. Claire leaned into him. I used to think Christmas was about miracles falling from the sky. Now I know miracles are built by people who choose to stop, to see, to help. The miracle isn't the magic, it's the choice. They stood together, watching the scene, two people who'd saved each other without knowing they needed saving, who'd built something bigger than themselves out of shared struggle and determined compassion. Ella's voice rang out clear in the cold night air as she handed a cookie to an elderly man just arriving. Welcome home. Nobody should be alone at Christmas. The man accepted the cookie with shaking hands and tears in his eyes. And Daniel knew that his daughter understood, that she'd learned the most important lesson, that home isn't a place, it's what you build when you open your heart to others. If you believe true miracles start with kindness, share this story and subscribe. We tell moments that remind the world that no one should spend Christmas alone in the cold.